Okay, here we go. We are live. Happy February, sir. We've made it through the first month of 2025. Everyone's still here for the most part. How are you doing?
Doing all right. Been on a grind for a while now. It's quite the start to the year, but yeah, actually, we're about to hit that whole Arctic outflow thing over here on the West Coast. We got
Yeah.
it there in the east for a while. Now we're getting it.
Yep,
Uh,
it's yeah, I think you guys will weather that quite well. it's it's
Getting Vancouver.
yeah.
We're getting 6 inches of snow in Vancouver. The whole city's gonna shut down.
Well, yeah, because it's usually rain more
Yeah.
often than not. Well, but the city, even though it's kind of is built a little bit to take care of snow. The problem is will they actually like remember that out there?
Yeah. Probably not.
Probably not. But we'll see what happens. Good to have you back. I know it's been a while, but it's well worth the wait, uh, especially for this week's script, which is it's a weird one. It's a weird one.
It's something.
It's something. I mean, I had the idea late last year, be like, okay, I like the theme months we did. We did some horror in October, and that was fun. And it's like, well, what's February? And I mean, the obvious one I wanted to go with was romance because romantic films seem to be kind of not on the forefront of a lot of people's mind. And around this time last year, there's that big romance comedy called Anyone But You that did way better than anyone expected. And I figured, okay, well, we got some romance scripts, or at least as they're advertised as romance scripts, on the blacklist, and that were circulating around. So let's try and throw them in there. So that's what I did. And we're kicking off this month. 4 scripts that are for romantic stories, or at least as the writer claims it to be. And we're gonna discuss the first one tonight. Here, if you can tell, we're kind of excited about it.
Yeah, it's thematically on point. I like the idea.
It
Uh,
is.
I, when we're gonna get into the logline synopsis, I will say ahead of time, I did not know what I was gonna read before I read it. I had no preconceptions. I thought this was potentially gonna be some sort of like horror thriller. I guess that's not what it is.
I thought it was going to be more like a Florence Nightingale thing, but let's like properly start into the show and let's get into this right now. Here we go, guys. Welcome to Scripts on Saturdays, the only screenplay review show on the interwebs discussing scripts both professional and amateur, circulating around Hollywood, giving you, the TV and movie-going audience, a behind-the-scenes and inside track on what writers are pushing and what producers are buying. I am your host, the Script Doctor, and joining me this week is CC Karaoke of the great CC Karaoke channel. Glad to have you back. This script, we're going to get into it in a moment, but there are some interesting details to point out. So this script placed number 4 on last year's blacklist with 37 votes. The title is Love of Your Life. It's written by Julia Cox, and apparently late last year she managed to sell this screenplay for $2 million to Jeff Bezos's Amazon company / MGM, and there was rumor that they wanted to get Sydney Sweeney in for the main lead. I hope she doesn't do a streaming movie, personally. She she's got too much steam behind her for that. But CC, why don't you share with us the log line for Love of Your Life?
Sure. Maya, a smart, wry nurse, is swept up in an immersive love, one that sets her life on a trajectory she would never have imagined.
Yeah, pretty vague, but short and sweet. Kind of is true to what the script actually presents. The synopsis for Love of Your Life is: a Boston nurse loses her husband to the chaos of the early 2020s and embarks on a transformative journey through Lisbon and Paris, meeting new people and reconnecting with old friends. She navigates grief, embraces second chances, and rediscovers love, intertwining past memories with new beginnings. So,
It's accurate. I'll give it that.
yeah, I mean, I worked for 3 days, not entirely, trying to come up with this type of synopsis for it, because There's a lot in this script. It's a long script, about 120 pages, so it's aiming for that 2 hour mark. A fun fact about Julia Cox is that she wrote the screenplay Naiad, which is which Jimmy Chin and Elizabeth Chai Varshavale, I can't say, directed. It was about the true story of the Diana Naiad, who at the age of 60 does her lifelong dream to swim from Cuba to Florida, and this was had Annette Bening and Jodie Foster in it. So, and apparently that got some pretty positive reviews, which
that might have helped her sell this one, I imagine.
I think so. I think the buzz from that success, she was able to roll that over into a sale for this one, which I would say that's some pretty good hustling for there as well, because her previous writing credits are basically like short stories and staff writer on Recovery Road, which you can tell she learned a lot from that series because that factors into a degree with one of the characters in this story. So
good for her. I mean,
yeah.
$1 million. I wish I had that kind of money. It's like, you know.
Well, I mean, if she's a resident of California, she probably only has 40% of that money.
Still, it's a lot of money.
Still, it's a lot of money. That you can go far with that. And this script here is quite a. I would say it's not like a hoodwinked, but it is kind of like I don't know. It presents itself in one way, and then it shows you something completely different. Because it does start out with our main character is Maya. She's we see her first in her early 40s, kind of doing some gardening on a property undisclosed exactly. She then starts to reminisce, and we jump back to her late 20s, where she is purchasing a type of like night table or side table from a guy named Charlie who is sweaty and disheveled, and he's I guess moving out of this house to a very odd shaped apartment. And yeah, go ahead.
I'm not going to get too far ahead of things here, but the first thing that came to mind about this, because we're jumping back about 15 years in her life, right?
Yeah. So
as a point of context, this script is covering about 15 years of her life.
Mm-hmm.
Spoiler alert, I guess. And I know my mom was talking to me on the phone earlier today. She was talking about how she really loved this new Bob Dylan biopic.
Right.
And one of the things she loves about it is that it covered only 2 years of his life. And that got me thinking a little bit about this, because I think one recurring theme we'll find in this script is that because it covers so many events and so much time, it never really settles in any one place for very long. And it's, you know, if you're really doing a kind of, and this is kind of a biopic of her life, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing that, it tends to be more effective to focus on a series of significant events within a constrained amount of time, rather than trying to tell someone's entire life. Not that you can't, but we'll get into it. But as you're mentioning, this opening scene, right?
Yes.
She meets Charlie.
She meets Charlie, who will eventually become her husband. But to your point, one of the key rules with regards to coming up with any story is you want to actually focus on the most important change in your main character's life. That is the story with which you maintain your focus. All the great stories kind of have that to some degree, and in some cases they kind of do this little, what I call like the cheat, where you take the 3 acts of your story and you're like, well, what's the most significant change that happened in the character's life that we can make just Act 1 all about? And how do we make that Act 1 flow into the events of Act 2? And where's that most significant change in their life in Act 2? And then how do we have that flow into your 3rd act, where you have that most significant change in Act 3? One of the better films to do this would be like Superman the movie by like Richard Donner and Tom Mankiewicz. I know that the Newmans have the official credit on the screenplay, but Tom Mankiewicz rewrote that movie. And he breaks it up where, you know, for Clark Kent, first most significant point of his life is when his father dies and he can't save him. Second most significant point is his first reveal as Superman. And then the third one is when Lois dies and he has to go back in time and save her. So there's your 3, you know, significant points, but they're all contained within an overarching story, and then of course the prologue of Krypton to get that all underway.
And we do spend the first 40 minutes with Charlie.
We do, and we kind of get to know him, not exactly that much, because one of the worst failings of this script is the fact that more people talk about who Charlie is, and we don't get as much of him showing us who he is. And that's kind of a negative towards it, because when we're introduced to Charlie, he talks about, oh yeah, he's an academic, he's a professor in basically sound and environmental stuff, and so we find out what he does, but we don't get so much in the actions other than the fact that he can get distracted, but then he cleans up nice, and he's very positive, but we don't see a whole lot of issues with a lot of conflict where his positivity kind of comes through to save the day, because they go out on a date. We get a date montage of things. They're eating ice cream. Then there's the whole, meeting, getting ready to meet the parents for the first time, because we find out that Maya, our main character, she's estranged from her mom, never knew who her dad was. She's a nurse. She kind of is all over the place, not really big on dating, or at least up until this point in her life, focused on work.
Yeah.
And our first real conflict that we get is she's had a 14-hour day. She comes home, and Charlie is ready to go take her to meet his family for the first time, and she is just too tired to do it, and it wasn't a great day. And he doesn't really push back on that, but he's trying to encourage her that it's okay because she's gonna do it. But now she's kind of like freaking out. She steps out of the shower. She's just wearing her towel, and she's got another towel drying off her hair, and they get into an argument, and then she leaves her own apartment and starts walking down the street. Before she stops, turns around and goes back in, and Charlie is still there. And then we get this whole thing where it's like, I can't believe you stayed. And then our next thing is, okay, they're in the car now driving to meet his parents like a couple hours later. And I'm reading this. I had to read this a couple times. I'm thinking you completely avoid the conflict. You just have her come to the revelation that it's okay.
I think that's one of the things that kind of threw me off with the script. I'm sure maybe some of the audience has read it, some of the audience hasn't. So we spend effectively, let's say 40 minutes of a 2-hour movie with these two characters. And that's one thing I do like, right? It doesn't confuse things with 20 different characters. This really is about Maya and Charlie for 40 minutes. It's really about showing us that they are in love, and this is a really, really great, healthy relationship. And I don't mind the fact that he's kind of idealized in that, it's showing us like he's actually a good man from what we can tell, from what we're told about him. And you're right, in this one moment of potential conflict in the whole first 40 minutes, right? He handles it well. He doesn't screw up. And, there's a part of me that felt a little bit refreshed by that, I'll admit, right? But, I mean, what we're kind of getting here from a structural standpoint, and we can certainly pick apart, one scene or another, but you mentioned montages. And it's just like, how many different scenes, I mean, I didn't count them, but how many different scenes are there in this first 40 minutes? There has to be like a couple hundred, because we're constantly like you get a few lines of dialogue, and some of the dialogue is actually pretty nice. The dialogue at the beginning when she first meets him with the cabinet and the drawer that sticks, I really liked that scene. That gave me a sense that maybe I was in for something kind of nice, like a really nice slice of life, kind of. And I don't mind, like as an anime fan, Japanese, anime fan myself, and they have a genre called slice of life, and that can be done really, really well, right? I mean, when it doesn't have to be about anything serious, it's about kind of building the characters and the way they interact. And in this initial scene in the movie, they're interacting over the fact that she's come over and she's going to buy this cabinet for her new home, and the drawer is stuck, and he's trying to unstuck it. So he's kind of he's showing us how he deals with that from a mental perspective, how he has to walk away and reset himself, and then approach it in a new, from a new perspective to try and get the drawer open, and that was cool, right?
Yeah.
But we didn't get a whole lot of time spent where we actually linger on these scenes, right? It was almost like that was the best scene in the whole first act of the movie, because after that, it's like, okay, here's a montage of 20 different things that they're doing, 10 seconds at a time. And then we flash to them, they're in their apartment, the relationship is building, and they spend 30 seconds talking. And then suddenly they're in the coffee shop, and suddenly they're at work. I mean, it's the antithesis of like a Quentin Tarantino film, right? Where, I mean, there's no time where it actually just sits and lets a fully fleshed conversation happen. If you're going to really go in this direction and do something more like sort of philosophical and kind of indie slice of life that doesn't strictly have to rely on typical conflict, but more like the interactions of interesting characters, that you really need to sit them down and have like fleshed out conversations. Whereas this is spending so much time just hopping from scene to scene to scene to scene to scene. It's like the whole purpose is trying to show us that they are a happy, healthy relationship. Okay, I get that, but you could also do that in about 2 minutes with a montage showing us that they're a happy, healthy couple, and that would kind of achieve the same thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of repetition of similar beats. The one thing that I thought was really missing from this is a sense of romance and flirtation. And I'll share a little bit of like my dating secret here that I do. So I still do this to this day with my girlfriend. Whenever we go out, I always act like it's the first date. I'm always flirting with her, trying to seal the deal. And I'm trying to do it in the most gentlemanly way possible. And it always gets her smitten. And I try new material every time, because the whole idea is the fact that you're not going out for the sake of going out. You're going out because you want to build more of the relationship. And here, every time we see them together, it doesn't feel like there's no romance at play here. There's no flirtation. There's no acting coy. There's no charm. It's kind of like the writer was so eager to get to the finish line with regards to the happiness between this couple that the catharsis of that happiness is completely diluted.
It's true. I mean, I was it like page 13 or something? They're already on the swan boat.
Yeah. and I'm like, I'd rather see the journey of how they get to the swan boat as opposed to just them there. Because there could be something fun there. Like, it could be the point where, okay, well, whose idea is it to go on the swan boat? Is it his? Does he get the idea because she looks at it and she just like is kind of transfixed on it, and he takes the cue and he's like, let's go and actually do that, and she's got the doubt and she's like, no, that's too hokey and cheesy. He's like, why not? Let's be hokey and cheesy. It's just for each other. Where's that type of stuff?
That's great conflict without having to have them be in a dysfunctional, hateful kind of relationship. If you want it to be a positive, uplifting thing, which obviously she does, and I respect that, what you just suggested is a fantastic way to introduce conflict without having it to be mean-spirited, right?
Oh, exactly, because it's not a conflict with regards to, say, something driven by hate. It's more like, can you give yourself permission to risk what would be perceived as public embarrassment, but really nobody's going to know or care outside of you and the person you're with. It just reminds me of another time. Like, I made my girlfriend at the time jaywalk because we didn't want to be late for an event, and I just grabbed her by the hand, and this was like our second date, and I was like, okay, just follow my lead, and I just made sure that I was in front of the oncoming traffic, and I just whisked her across the street really quickly.
That's another great idea, because the person I've been wooing was getting frustrated with the fire alarm because it was breaking a bit. Fire alarms, like, sometimes they just frustrate you because they beep when they shouldn't be beeping.
Right.
And it's like, why is it beeping again? So I went and I took the thing and I ripped the battery out of it. And she loved it, right? But she wouldn't, because you're really not supposed to do that. But yeah, so it's like,
you solved a problem that has a little bit of a conflict, and then the question is, okay, Do I put a new battery in and hope it doesn't beep again, or do we go buy a new smoke alarm?
Right. So that's a great way to introduce conflict. And you're right. There's not a whole lot of that here. It's just really just trying to convince us that they're happy and healthy and that they're in love, which is fine. I don't need 40 pages to see that across 200 different quick snippets.
Well, the other part too is that we spent so much time on that end table and the jammed door that I was hoping that would be something we came back to. Like it'd be funny when they moved in together, and then he goes by, is like, "Oh, where's those things?" Like, "Oh, I put it in the cabinet," and he goes for it, and every time it's stuck and he can't open it, so he keeps on approaching it several different times, and there's your comedic beat, and then she's able to open it up, and you have that kind of dynamic, right?
Oh yeah, no, I hadn't thought of that, but it's true. I mean, there's nothing, because this script is almost three completely different stories. And at no point are there any callbacks, really. I mean, sure, I mean, we'll get to it, obviously. Well, the synopsis already gave the plot away in that sense, right? Charlie does pass away. And I think that part of the point here is that we're supposed to become emotionally connected to him. And so I'm sure the intent is that by emotionally connecting with him as a character, we feel the impact of his eventual death. I could see that maybe being the course of an entire movie.
Right.
So obviously, there's a mechanism there by which we understand that the way she reacts to that event, which we can get to, is, because of how significant that is. But I mean, that's the most of a callback we get. Right. I mean, what you're referring to with the cabinet, it's one of maybe my favorite scene in the entire script is that initial scene.
Yeah.
With her and with Maya and Charlie in the cabinet, and you're right. It would be perfect to come back to that somehow, even if it's not just maybe if it's not just him struggling with the cabinet again, but making the cabinet part of like a character in the story. Because she almost seems to be going in that direction, because what happens is she finally gets that cabinet door open, right? Or and she discovers there's a mixtape inside of a kind, right, that she puts into her Walkman, and that's part of how she connects with him. So why not have that cabinet? Since they're in an apartment together, the apartment is a feature of the script. Obviously, they keep returning to it. So that cabinet should be in the apartment. And maybe this is something a really skilled director could do with the script, since they're going to film it. You have that cabinet in the apartment every time the apartment is featured, and you see it change with them.
Yeah, because it's essentially a totem that brought them together. And then you have the cassette tape, which is kind of a little bit of who... she was trying to write this cassette tape as it was a part of who he was. His memory, his aspects, because what he does, and maybe I'll have a bit more knowledge on this, because I'm a little far behind on keeping up with how analog cassettes work. But apparently he did this type of repetitive scale with music and notes on the tape, and every time you play it, the tape degrades just a little bit, but after so many plays, eventually the notes will fall off and you'll just have white noise. And this is done by design from him. And for some reason, like, she listens to it and it gets into her head, kind of like an earworm of sorts. And it's something that she associates with Charlie. And they end up talking a little bit about it on their first date. And then he says this kind of interesting thing where she's like, "I should give this back to you." And he says, "Well, technically you bought it, because it was part of the cabinet of this end table thing." And I'm like, well, that's an interesting dynamic. Are we going to see more with that? And unfortunately, we don't see more on that part of Charlie. But every once in a while, the cassette tape does come up, and I want to get your thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, it's something that's not in the script. But if they were going to polish things up, or again, a director who can add something to within the context of the script, it's a theme that's presented early in this script, like within the first 10 pages. Probably my favorite part of the entire script. that sets up an idea that could be followed through on throughout the movie, because this is, I guess, if it's kind of a biopic of her life in a way, it's she is it even on the very first page, it's introducing us to this character Maya, and that she is, as you would expect somebody in in their mid-20s to be, vibrant and still kind of hopeful, and the 40s something version of her, at least at the beginning of the movie, is quite a bit more beaten down with time, much as the tape would degrade over time. So there's a good idea there about how things wear down over time. I mean, anyone who, as you get older, your body just keeps breaking down, right? But there's a kind of a beauty to that too. So again, we have such a disparate kind of focus here in so many different places. We're jumping to all these different locations and times. But if you have a bit more of a rooted location, like the apartment again, one of the joys that can be brought to a movie like this, if you want that theme of the progression of time, is if you kind of take a little bit of that noise out of the script and focus more on like that central point, like the apartment. Like the apartment becomes the third character. Because one thing I do love about this script, for all my issues with it, is that it does at least focus very much on Maya and Charlie, at least certainly in this first act. It doesn't overbloat the number of characters too much. There are times when other characters come in, right? But it does, at least in this initial act, very much feel like it is about these two. So the third character could be the apartment, and we could see the communication of their developing relationship visualized through the apartment, not just with the table, but with how their entire apartment evolves with them and changes, and how maybe things do break. Maybe, the table gets scratched or you spill something on the rug, how the way they interact changes their environment and degrades it so that it's breaking, but it's also kind of beautiful. And maybe the relationship could reflect that, because over time, even in a good relationship, there is a kind of degrading aspect, right?
Yeah, there's always a little bit of that spark that kind of fades. And I think that could be tethered in, because what's the first thing that Maya does when she gets home while listening to the tape? Well, she refinishes the table, the end table, to make it look nice and beautiful again.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, okay, well, that's kind of she even though like Charlie had his own investment in that table beforehand, but then when she got it, she kind of reinvigorated it, and now you have what should, I think a different writer maybe would have used that table of, okay, she just refinished it, it looks brand new, it's beautiful, it's whatever. Let's make this kind of a background key point of tracking this relationship. So as the years go on, you change the table, like you finish it, or maybe you just watch it kind of fall apart on its own, or maybe you finally fix that sticky drawer after so many frustrating years. Just give us something to as a parallel to it. Like you could bring it into comparison with, like, say, the Beauty and the Beast tale. You have the rose, every petal kind of falls off, and it's just a ticking clock, symbol of the beast's permanent transformation, unless Belle, Beauty herself, rescues his soul, type of thing. Doesn't need to be that level of drama, but I would prefer some drama into this, because as we were saying before the show, Hitchcock has this famous quote that drama is life with all the boring parts cut out. And in this script here, I'd say boring is life with all the drama cut out. And there's a lot of boring, unfortunately, in this script. It's a very different type of narrative style. It feels more like voyeurism, and it has a lot of "and then this happens" moments.
And that'd be my major issue with it. Is I want stuff to be extrapolated on more. I want to see something develop, and then suddenly, after like half a page, we're just moving on to the next event to witness.
Yeah, because as Charlie and Maya's relationship develops, she brings him to a party with her friends and introduces to her best friend Jason, who's also in his late 20s. He's kind of like scrawny, and he's an alcoholic salesman of sorts, I guess. I'm not really sure what his job was. And even until the very end, I'm like, okay, it has something to do with property now. But they were friends in college, and there's this little running. The only running gag that they have in there, not much of a gag, is that Charlie feels like he has seen Maya before. And they did go to the same school, and they may have been part of the same class, but the class had over 200 students, so it was be very difficult for you to confirm that they were there at the same time. But that is something that's always been kind of eating away at Charlie, but he doesn't really dwell on it too much because he's with Maya. And then Jason is this third wheel of sorts, but not really. He ends up becoming best friends with Charlie. And you find out that Jason and Maya dated for a short second in college and then ended up just becoming friends afterwards, and nothing ever spawned from that. But now you have this interesting relationship where Charlie and Jason are now best friends. And then Charlie and Maya are getting far more serious. We talked about how Maya is now taken to meet Charlie's family. And this next beat is that we meet Ruth and Kenny, who are in their 70s, and we find out that Charlie was adopted, and that Charlie has two older brothers that are twins, who don't really have any speaking parts at all. They're just there as part of the family.
They appear very, very briefly. I completely forgot he even had twin brothers until you mentioned it.
Yeah. The reason I kind of remembered that is because the way that the writer introduces them is that she says, and these are Charlie's twin brothers, Matt and Colin, age 36. I'm like, well, wait a minute. The grammar's a little off there, because when you say it's someone's twin brothers, you are assuming that they're the twins of him. But then you're like, well, then when you say triplets, and it felt like the grammar was off. It's like, no. And here are Matt's brothers, Charlie. Here are Matt's brothers. Charlie's brothers, Matt and Colin, twins, age 36. That's how you would do it to make it clear and cohesive. But yeah, they're married. They have their own kids. They're just there. But we really focus mostly on Ruth, Charlie's mom, and she's this. She's kind of like this whippersnapper that drinks a lot of Bud Light. and
oh yeah, I had to chuckle when I saw that. I was like, okay.
And I'm like, okay, well, this is something. And you can tell that there's a little bit of an edge to her, but Maya also wants to really be liked by her. And it's just kind of like an empty scene of like, okay, here we're talking a little bit about Charlie as he's grown up, how he's 10 years old and he's going to go to a Mensa school, but he says, I don't want to go to the Mensa school because it's for elitists. And then the dad's like, well, you agreed to do it, so put your signature here, kid, and go. And I'm thinking, can a 10-year-old sign something with consent for school? For anything, really? Like, even for Mensa? That threw me off for a bit, because I didn't know. It's like, it's a school. You go where your parents send you. You don't really have a choice in the matter.
I mean, for me, it just points to one of my frustrations with the script. I mean, it's not a bad idea. Right? Mm-hmm. The relationship between Maya and Ruth has some teeth to it. I do like the concept of how, especially say with Charlie's eventual death, which we'll get to. We are introduced to the Ruth character and how Maya and Ruth interact prior to and after, and there's something there, but it's like the script has so many disparate ideas, right? But whether it's the chest that we were talking about before, the drawer, mm-hmm. Or Charlie, or Ruth, or eventually Maya's travels abroad, and the other men in her life, and Jason. You mentioned Jason as a character.
Yep.
Whom she dated for a hot second in college. There's an idea there, there's a character there, and something to explore about why her relationship with him matters. But none of it is ever really explored enough to go anywhere. It's just kind of presented a little bit, There's only so much you can do with a couple of pages sometimes. And Jason is maybe a great example of this. We are introduced to him. As particularly in this first act, we understand that she's been friends with him for a long time, and that they're kind of like family to each other. They did date for the hot second, and he obviously cares about her. We understand that, but we're kind of that's as far as it really goes, right?
Yeah.
We understand that he's important, okay, but why? What are the events and the context that give that more gravity than just being told, for half a page that yeah, they're really close.
Yeah,
Okay.
like where's the friendship shorthand that they have, or where's
Yeah.
where's that overlay of interest or the bickering that you can see between friends that makes you understand that oh, I get this type of relationship. Like I see why they're friends.
Yeah.
That was severely lacking. It also got a little bit weird when we get to Charlie's birthday, because they're really stressed out about it, and a hurricane has apparently hit, and it's knocked out the power, and it's apparently very, very hot in their apartment as
Yeah.
guests are coming in. But then you get this other part where you find out Jason is actually at the train station picking up Charlie's parents. Like, that's how close these two guys have become since they met, is that Jason is picking up, the family. And
And sorry to cut you off.
no, go ahead. It's quite weird. Quite fine.
There's an idea. That's one of the things I was thinking while I was reading this script is there's 20 different movies in this script, and they could be 20 good movies. The problem is they're all smashed into this one movie, right? Like, I mean, you could write a movie about how a character like Jason gets really, really close to Charlie, and they become best friends, and all the kind of trials and tribulations and chaos and funny events that may occur in that very strange dynamic. None of that is in this script. It's just kind of assumed. Like it's told in literally a couple of lines. Jason became best friends with Charlie. Okay.
Yeah. So much so best friends that when we get to this party, we find out that not only is it Charlie's birthday party, but it's also going to be their wedding. They have an in-house wedding. They got an wedding officiant, and she's got her dress on. And everybody all gasps and is shocked, but then they cheer, and they've got a bathtub full of ice with champagne in there, so you can help yourself. And so they do the wedding, and everything goes off without a hitch. And then Jason seems to have a really great kind of best man speech, which later we find out that Maya asked Charlie, like, "Did you tell him we were going to do this?" And he's like, "No, did you?" And she's like, "No." So he just had that ready to go. Because he doesn't pull out a piece of paper or anything. He just kind of says it sort of like, you think stream of consciousness, but it's really well formed.
It was nice. It was perfect, and it was conflict free. And when I was reading it, I was really hoping that he would say something really awkward about how that doesn't maybe completely directly infer how he feels about her, but sets off a chain of events. And there was an opportunity there for that whole night to be something more than it was. But it's a cool idea. It's like a kind of surprise marriage, right? Everyone gets together for a party, and you could have written an entire act of the movie on that night, but we get like 2 or 3 pages,
Yeah,
and nothing much happens.
pretty much nothing much happens. They get married. The friendship's stable there. Things are going well. There's talk of them having kids, but Maya wants to put it off for a little bit. And then we enter the 2020s. And of course, the biggest thing that happened then was the pandemic. And Maya, being a nurse, is now working 14 to 16-hour shifts every day, trying to help people get over this crazy virus that's been spreading around. We have a brief moment where one of the patients owns a restaurant, and he's unable to speak because he's so ill. But she's trying to cheer him up and saying that, her husband and best friend are probably going to order half the menu when you get out of here. And, she's trying to be empathetic to him and help him through. And as she's about to get off work, she learns from one of her colleagues that patient has just passed on. And it just starts breaking her heart. And the hospitals are buzzing. Everybody is... overworked and not sure what to do. and all of their standard operating procedures are not seem to be mitigating anything, and it's stressing her out. And we see what her routine is. It's like she's at work, she gets home, she bundles up her scrubs, everything, throws it into the washer, just kind of strolls through her apartment naked straight to the shower, while her husband Charlie is doing his online lectures, and then basically just hits the sack and wakes up and repeats it over and over again until like the one day where they're saying, okay, like Charlie's in there, he's wiping down groceries with his sanitizing wipes, and he's saying, when this is all over, we got to go on a trip. We just got to go explore the world. Like, where do you want to go that you haven't been before? And he just starts writing all these locations down that Maya's kind of rambling off. One of them is California. She's never been to California, but it's kind of like the last thing on her list. And then after they kind of make this list, we get our first change, which is that Charlie starts coughing, and the coughing doesn't stop, and then he's having trouble breathing. And you can pretty much realize, okay, yeah, he's got the bug. And Maya is taking care of him, but she's constantly reminding him, like, we need to get you to the hospital, we need to get you treated. There's only so much I can do here. And Charlie, who is also an asthmatic, is trying to hold on and say, no, I just want to be here with you. If we go to the hospital, they won't let you see me, etc., etc. But it gets to a point where his blood oxygen level decreases, I think below 92, 90 or whatever number. It's arbitrary at this point. But she eventually orders the ambulance, and she gives all the information to the paramedics of his health and condition. And she's trying to jump into the back, and the paramedics have to reluctantly say, you can't come with him. And that's the last time she physically sees Charlie, because he is driven off to the hospital. The hospital she actually works at, mind you. And the only way she can get a status on her husband is through one of her coworkers, which this threw me off a little bit because, I mean, if you're an employee of the hospital and you've got scheduled shifts at the hospital, you are allowed on the premises, are you not? If anyone out there in the chat or listening to this elsewhere and has thoughts on this, please leave a comment, because I can only go by what I know happens up here in Canada, because my aunt, before she retired, just after the pandemic, did run a hospital. And yes, some of her staff's family were patients at the hospital, and the staff were able to see them on breaks or around their shifts if they so wanted to. That might be a unique interaction for some, but I would figure if you're a nurse at a hospital and you have a family member there, so long as you're not treating them, you should basically be able to have access to see them in some capacity, even with the crazy aspects that had been done during that period. Were you surprised by this sudden change with Charlie, with the revelation of it being this period in time, and then Charlie being catching this virus?
I mean, when I started reading the script, I was expecting him to turn around and become a psycho killer, and that this was going to be like a horror thriller. Obviously, that's not what we got. That's fine. Yeah. So that was what I was surprised about. I had no preconceptions going in. As far as this event, yeah, I didn't, because there was no mention in the entire script of this event. There was actually no mention of the fact of when it took place. I didn't know if it took place in 1980 or 2000, which is, not necessarily a bad thing. Mm-hmm. But the revelation that this was now the year 2020 kind of came out of nowhere. There was no setup for that whatsoever. And, I mean, until the moment at which we find out that this is happening. So that was a bit jarring. And it felt a little bit like, the writer is trying to tell us about the message of a position from that time, and how she feels about that time, and how we should all feel about that time. It's not the worst thing by any stretch. I'm not going to say that it qualifies as being absolutely terrible, but it does feel like, she's definitely trying to communicate the horror of that time.
Right.
Now, I mean, and look, I'm sure that it did absolutely happen that people were not allowed to see their loved ones as they passed. And on the one hand, I understand that, that's a there is something kind of gut wrenching about that she couldn't see them. On the other hand, while that is maybe the message that the writer wanted to convey here, from a dramatic standpoint, I mean, because we're watching a movie here, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot that you could have done if she was able to, like, what if she was didn't? Okay, she was denied. She couldn't get into the hospital. Was she just going to stand there and take it? How's she going to try and get into the hospital?
Yeah.
There's almost a whole movie that in itself, just exploring the passage of her. Like, she's absolutely in love with this man. He's the most important man to her in the world. She works at this hospital. She's got to find a way in there.
I mean,
she finds a way in there, right? And then you could have that whole moment, right? They have it over the phone.
Well,
Okay.
we had the last conversation over the phone, but to your point, it's like she's worked at this hospital for many years, the entirety of her relationship with Charlie. You would think that she would know other ways to get into the building. I mean, it's a hospital. I've worked at hospitals before. I even know general hospitals. Like, listen, you can walk in and get pretty far anywhere in a hospital before someone asks you, "What are you doing here?" Especially during the pandemic times.
And if you work there and you have credentials?
Yeah, work there, you have credentials, you've got a lanyard that with like an RF reader to get past secure doors and stuff. Like, there should be no issues for this at all. The other part, too, it's also like you are a nurse. You are a valuable commodity of sorts to the hospital. Regardless of your husband being a patient, there's still a lot you can do for other patients in that hospital at that time. Why would they ever try to say, no, don't come in? Because again, unfortunately, this script doesn't get political with like the next couple of steps that happened in the pandemic later on with regards to rejecting nurses or doctors from coming in. But it just doesn't feel like, oh, this is a dramatic point where we can actually see it's not so much that she's abiding by the orders as the fact that how much is her love going to let her cross this threshold and maybe show us some stakes. That was completely avoided, and I think it was avoided because perhaps Julia Cox, the writer, didn't want to. I think she wanted to try and echo more real life than what a movie is supposed to do, what a story is supposed to do, which is kind of embolden the real life elements to a dramatic level.
And I appreciate that there is a tragedy to how that happened in real life. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you're taking a kind of a montage over 2 pages or 2 minutes of the movie, and I suppose there's an impact to it that I can understand, that maybe there's a regret that she did not, go as far as she could have to see him, right?
Right.
That she did give up. And there's a point in the script where she kind of calls herself a bit of a quitter too, right? And so I understand maybe that's part of her character, and it is one of her flaws. But it's never really explored, right? If that is the thing that that's like the great regret that she didn't try harder and go to all lengths to see him. I mean, we see her like
we see her grief, yeah.
We see her grief, but it's never really tied into that aspect of her character as well as I would like, So, I mean, if you're going to do it that way, it has to become a really kind of like an important character, so to speak, right? Like that regret has to become a character in the story for me. Otherwise, take advantage of the dramatic opportunity to show her like not caring about the consequences. She has to see them, right?
Yeah, she should be it would embolden us with her character. We'd be like, oh, okay, I get it now. Like, she was resistant at the meat cube, and now this man has become her whole world, and she doesn't want to be apart from him. And this is what she's going to do to get there. And it doesn't have to be overly dramatic. It's just she walks in, she checks in. Maybe she says she's picking up a shift for somebody, but then she just goes straight to be beside her husband. And as he's passing, that's when the doctors come and try to save him, and then they actually have to push her out. And now she's got this buffer here, a natural buffer, and then she could physically see, him pass on, and maybe scream through the glass of like everything that she's trying to say to him before he goes, and then you have that defeated moment of she's just lost the love of her life. But we don't get any of that. It's done over the phone, and I think that's supposed to echo, the reports that we saw over the last 5 years of people talking about, yes, the last moments with their loved ones during this time was over the phone or over FaceTime or something, Skype or Zoom or whatever. It was so unintimate that it felt kind of soulless. I would have liked a better means to get to that point than this one. It just felt too quick, too rapid. And then we repeat something similar to that again because Ruth shows up at her place and she's not buzzed in, but she starts screaming at Maya, blaming her that her son is dead. And Maya, of course, can't let her in because she's apparently tested positive for the virus and she doesn't want to spread it. So she's under quarantine. And Ruth just says some pretty horrible things to her and eventually leaves. And this takes us into the next part, which is from pages, I guess, 50 to 85 or something.
Basically the second third of the movie.
The second third of the movie, Maya is now a nurse through telehealth, which means she can work remotely. And she has pretty much left her life in Boston, and she is globetrotting around Europe, kind of drinking, eating, eavesdropping, doing her diagnoses over telemedicine, telehealth network, and meeting random male strangers, sleeping with them, taking off, and is just kind of in this cycle where it's like she's trying not to feel, but at the same time trying to feel everything else, so to speak. And it's a pretty dark pit for her. So
yeah, it's also kind of where I started to tune out a little bit. I mean, as much as I say that I feel like the development of her relationship with Charlie could have been handled better on many, many levels. I would like, I still, in reading the script, I was still attached to this dynamic. And now you've really taken the wind out of the sails by killing him. So she does. She goes off to Europe, and I'm kind of wondering for this next 40 minutes of the movie, like, why am I supposed to care?
Yeah.
What is going on here? What is even relevant about any of this? I mean, you can certainly communicate that she's self-destructing. There's a nice scene where she gets way too drunk and she's in the park and she's puking, and this man that she's with is like, "That's okay, I'll kiss you anyways." Okay.
Yeah, like he is just not, he doesn't mind the vomiting. He is just all for the tail, so to speak.
And there's a cool idea there that maybe love does strike twice, but that's a whole different movie. And it's kind of like in complete antithesis of we're building up the fact that Charlie was the one and only, but apparently he's not. Okay, that's but it's in great conflict with what we spent so much time investing in. It undermines her, and it kind of undermines her character a bit too, because I mean, I can understand that she's flawed, and that's fine. And there's a good story there, that her method of grief is to run off to Europe and sleep with a bunch of men. But wow, does it ever just completely undermine the whole like intimacy of the relationship we spent the whole first act building up? She got over it by boning a bunch of other guys and getting drunk at bars.
It's a pretty toxic way to grieve. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, and look, and there's a story to be told there. But what I was feeling when I was reading this second act was, you know what? If the first 2 minutes of the movie was a montage of this beautiful marriage and relationship she had with this man who died, and then the movie was her being that character, self-destructing and kind of like a philosophy of life during this kind of a period of her life in Europe, and the characters she meets along the way, that's its own movie. But kind of set alongside of spending 40 minutes building this relationship with Charlie, I didn't really like it as much, you know?
Yeah, because I felt the 40 minutes investment wasn't as potent as you'd want it to be to sort of make that grief hit you as hard as possible, and then understand that, I mean, this next 50 pages is essentially her trying to run away from her grief and not think about it for as long as possible until it catches up to her again. I will say there is a smart aspect to it where if you're going to be drinking and eating a lot as part of your grief, yeah, do it in Europe because you won't gain as much weight doing that over there as you would domestically. Because they still remark, like, they say, like, yeah, she's still in shape. She's still beautiful, even though she's, like, in her 40s. And, I mean, there's no reason why she shouldn't be. I mean...
well, I guess at this point, mid-30s, right?
I think mid to late 30s because we're not sure how many years have passed, but we do know it's years. And we do know by the time that she meets Felix, who's this English photographer, she is definitely 40 years old, and he's like late 30s. And she meets him by way of the fact that he's having fun at a party, and then I guess he burns his hand. And he's about to like put butter on it, and she steps in as the nurse and says, no, this is how you treat the wound. And as she's treating his wound and dressing it down, he asks her out, and she doesn't mind at this point.
And there is a smart way to deal with this if you're calling back to her relationship with Charlie.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of tries to a little bit because she does obviously reminisce about him a little bit, but it also feels like a completely separate event most of the time, right? Like there's nothing about her relationship with Charlie and the events that she encounters in Europe that really reflects upon the relationship and the events that she built with Charlie. Again, we'll go back to the cabinet. If the cabinet that we're introduced to at the beginning of the film is a character, does she bring it with her to Europe? Mm-hmm. Is it with her where she's living now? How has it changed? You know, how does her day-to-day life in the grieving process in Europe reflect the life that she used to have? And none of that is really in this second act, right? It's just kind of...
It's just kind of there. Like, we barely even get the cassette tape in the second act as well. Like, even that aspect that could have been a running piece is pushed very deep into the background for a very, very long time in this story.
To the point in which you completely forget it exists.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's like where in the first act is a vehicle to convince us of the strength of her relationship with Maya. The second act is a vehicle to show us that she's grieving and she's hurting. And okay, that is to a point. That's fine, right? But I need a whole lot more than that. I don't need 40 minutes of just trying to convince me that she's grieving. Give me 2 minutes of that. And then let's get into something a little bit more. You know, I understand it. If you've done a good job, I don't need to be convinced too hard that she's grieving. You know, you can do that with a couple of small things.
Yeah, give us those dramatic points to point out, okay, yeah, we get it. This is how she's coping with the loss of her husband. We should see some consequences to that, which we don't, unless
it's inferred much later.
Yeah,
because what we understand is, and it isn't even really properly communicated at the moment, right? She just bails.
Yeah.
After he dies, she just picks up and bails to Europe and doesn't tell anybody, and we don't even get any context to that until the end of the movie. You know, I mean,
yeah, we're left wondering, like, we given that the fact that she has a job that she uses through her laptop, it's like, okay, well, she's clearly set up her life so that she can live this way. So you are under the impression that she has put those things in order. But after we meet Felix and we go through that part, we find out that, well, the effort she took to put those things in order were kind of very basic, and it was like a night and day aspect. It was like, okay, I get up, I decide I'm leaving, I do these checks, and then I go, and never followed up to make sure that they went through.
And you know what?
Yeah.
What has satisfied me, honestly, and I'm just thinking of it now. He's died. The situation, the scene with Ruth has happened. What if she just she sees the Walkman on the dresser, and she picks it up and she puts the headphones on, and she's listening to it, and it's degrading, and maybe because we're in that time too, the apartment is a mess and it's kind of breaking down because they've been neglecting it for so long because they've been so busy and everything's been so chaotic, and there just hasn't been time to maintain life. It's the laundry's not done, things are scattered on the floor, the sink is full of dishes. I want to see how much that apartment has just come apart in the chaos.
Yeah.
And then she puts those headphones on, and it's warped and it's fading. And that's the moment that she makes that compulsive decision to pack her bags and run. And that would communicate to me the grief. I don't need 50 minutes to be convinced of it. That would be enough if you've set up that kind of association throughout the movie, right?
Right.
Because, like I said, the apartment is the third character. It's probably looking beautiful and really coming together and becoming a home throughout the development of their relationship and through the development of the virus and her 16-hour days and the stress that puts on their relationship, which we don't really see a whole lot of because he's such a perfect man, which is great. And I appreciate that kind of idealism, but I want to see that strain break down their home too, right? I want to see the kitchen sink full of dishes, and I want to see, even I don't need 50 minutes of it, but I want to see even just like a shot of her staring at the ceiling in bed. You know what I mean?
Like a little bit of that cabin fever type of aspect that
yeah,
what people were going through. Yeah, because that would show you that the world outside is actually getting into them, and then you're wondering, well, is their love and relationship strong enough to persevere through this? Like, Charlie is crafted in this story as like the perfect guy, and then he's taken away, and we don't get another great guy in Maya's life until she meets Felix. And the whole story with Felix is that he's a guy who he's not married, but he has like a 4 or 5 year old daughter named Noelle with a French woman, who that relationship is kind of rocky. Like they're cordial to each other, but they're not, together. And this is kind of pushes Maya into the position where now she's dating a guy who has a child, and that child's presence is kind of stirring up her maternal instincts. And for her, it's implied that that boat is kind of sailed, because we do have this actually that probably a very endearing scene is after she meets Noelle the first time. Noelle is quite smitten with her that she invites her to her birthday party. And at some point in the birthday party, Noelle gets so overwhelmed with all the guests and the attention that she just kind of hides in the bathroom. And Maya reaches out to her, and they have a brief little discussion, and then Noelle just kind of like nestles up to her and calms down with Maya. And that, to me, that seems like a scene that would really hit hard well for where Maya is at her point in life, where she's like probably thinking, yeah, if Charlie didn't die, I'd be in a bathroom with my kid going, helping her through this this moment here. But that didn't happen. And then we get a little bit of a conversation between her and Felix saying like she regrets not trying to start a family sooner, because then she would have at least had someone around, which I felt is a little bit, it's sweet in one part but dark in another, because it's basically saying, it's not enough for Charlie wasn't enough. Like, maybe I wanted that kid, but I pushed it off because I wanted more time with Charlie, and now that I don't have him, I want to put all those feelings into that child, which that can actually kind of mess up a kid as well when you try to make them kind of step up to replace one of their parents, especially if they died early in life and the child is rather young. It's a very dangerous dynamic to put in there. But the fact that she entertains those ideas shows how much she misses Charlie, and then, she gets really messed up from that, to the point where when Felix tries to take the relationship a step further, she says the wrong thing and kind of takes off again. And
Yeah, I mean, that I would say that the scene you mentioned with Noelle is probably the best scene in the second act.
yeah,
The trouble for me is, like, I never connected with Felix.
right.
Right? I mean, I didn't really understand. I mean, okay, he's a rebound. He's not a bad guy. There's second chances in life. There's some themes there, but I didn't really. I mean, it just felt a little. I just felt completely disconnected from it.
It's like a Harlequin romance novel to a point. Like this
Yeah.
other guy comes in and he does all these things and he looks all this good and he's a photographer and he captures her beauty in this on celluloid and for me I'm just like, okay, yeah, and like
There's a movie or certainly a great theme that can be explored in the fact that she doesn't have kids and she's getting older and time is running out. But it's like it was a very touching scene, but it's kind of just it's on its own, right? It's not. How is it connected to the rest of the story except that we understand that she's lost Charlie and she's getting older? It's great. I mean that's context, right? But it's not. I don't know. It's hard for me to explain what I'm thinking here, I guess, a little bit. But it's like, how is this really? It doesn't feel tied in at all. She just happens to be Felix's, daughter from another marriage. That's reminding her of this, and I guess that is part of her passage in Europe. I understand that, but I mean, this was never really explored in her relationship with Charlie. Okay, it's implied that she doesn't want to have kids, as you mentioned, and she's made that decision passively, but it's not really a theme in the movie, even though it clearly is meant to be, because this is a depiction of her life from mid-20s to early 40s. So there is a kind of like a biological clock involved here, and that is there's a lot you can tell there, right?
yeah,
But it's almost like we're more than halfway through the movie, and this scene with Noelle, it has nothing to set it up. It just kind of occurs, right? This has not been set up at all throughout the entire script that this is a conflict for her. Maybe there's a hint here and there, but it's not really part of the story. There's no. There was never any conflict around it within her relationship with Charlie that will they, won't they have kids, and why, and the kind of how that is impacting her character and her decision making. We just know, okay, well, I mean, as a viewer, frankly, as a reader, I know that she's in her late 30s. As a viewer, do I know that she's in her late 30s? Do I know that she's running out of time? Is there anything in the script that actually tells me from a visual standpoint, other than the fact that we understand that years are passing?
mm-hmm.
And then this scene with Noelle happens. I need a little bit more connection.
Yeah, I'm the other part too is I need stakes. I don't have any stakes for her at this point in her life. But like, you haven't, the script hasn't given me anything as to why I should care about this. That why should this matter at this point? We haven't learned anything solid enough of Maya to say, yes, this is a character I want to follow. This is a character I want to root for. This is a character I empathize with. It's not there. It's very intangible. And then the romance that she has with Felix is very much like a fantasy. Like they're just trotting across various parts of Europe while he's taking photographs and he's interacting with his sweet little girl. And something, and I wish I could convey to the audience listening what it is, but it's not really there. Something happens where she just kind of bolts. And what we end up finding out is, like, she goes to therapy, she starts taking dance classes, and 6 months pass by, and she reconnects with Felix again. Only Felix has now started a proper relationship with the mother of his daughter. We skipped over something.
That's kind of the issue, right? I mean, it's
yeah.
like,
I mean, yeah.
how did that happen again?
Yeah, how did that happen again? So at one point while she's dating Felix, she's at a restaurant, and then Jason walks in, and she tries to hide herself from him until her behavior gets Felix to call out her name, which then gets Jason's attention. He turns in direction. He recognizes Maya, and he tries to rebuild that connection. And they end up getting into she gets a little bit into a spat because Jason reveals that she just up and disappeared, and everybody called her, and everybody was looking for her, and we also get this kind of weird aspect with Jason where the reason he's there is because he's there to meet a dinner with someone, with a client or a friend or something, and when Felix invites him to join Jason to join them, he says okay, but then Maya points out, well, what about the people that you came here to meet? And she doesn't really give Jason a time to answer, and then she just kind of lays into him. And the other part too is you also notice that Jason has like a new scar across his face, like down the side of his head, and we don't know what the story of that scar yet. But what ends up happening is, I guess, this revelation that Jason has brought forth for Felix is that Maya just kind of up and left after her husband died, and a lot of people were worried about her and they didn't know where she was, and it's a miracle that Jason found her because he was in Paris, I guess, on business.
Yeah,
and
miracle.
That, I guess, contributes to the scare that causes Maya to then leave. Maybe, I don't know. I think that's what the writer might have been trying to do here.
The script does heavily imply that that it was a chance meeting, which I don't like. The world may be small, but it's not that small. And honestly, from a narrative standpoint, drama, and it's a film, like, we're trying to understand that Jason is absolutely in love with Maya. So yeah, he found her and he sought her out. That's the right way to play this. It wasn't a chance meeting.
Yeah, I would have appreciated that more.
Like again, tell us from the start that she bailed, and tell us that he found her. But also, that goes to the point that we don't really have any character development with Jason throughout the entire first act of the movie. You know, we don't. If we understand, again, like maybe with that the dinner and the marriage was a great opportunity when he stands up and he speaks. If we understand that Jason is in love with her, and that there is a conflict there, it adds more gravity to the fact that he crossed the world to find her, and then she shat on him, right?
Yeah.
She basically just craps all over him in that restaurant, and everybody's staring and looking. And there's a powerful scene there. If we have that build up that he loves her very, very much, and he went to all this effort after she kind of just bailed on everybody, and didn't say a word, and she reacts by absolutely destroying him in public in front of everybody in a crowded restaurant. There's a scene there, but for it to really, really land, we need all this context and build-up that isn't really presented yet, or at all.
No, there's nothing of it there. I mean, and that's, to me, I'm like, that's a missed opportunity. That is a key point of a missed opportunity. It's like, oh, if you set us up to the point where maybe, yeah, he loves her, but he's not going to throw a monkey wrench into that love between her and Charlie, that's one thing. But the other part too, I'm wondering is, well, if you do that, you have to make sure that for him to be a character that we like, he has to move on from her as well. And one thing that's very interesting about this script is that at no point do we ever see Jason in a relationship with anyone.
And it's true. Like, I can relate to the concept of relationships that percolate for a very, very long time, and I think that's a great idea to just make philosophy I'll live by. Make your friends, right, and keep them and treat them well over very many years, because life is long. But you also have to you know, we're led to believe that Jason has not explored anything else for like 20, 25 years.
Maybe, yeah, at that
Uh,
length, yeah.
that 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 that's a story in and of itself, right?
Right.
Maybe there's a movie there. It would certainly be one heck of a piece of his character development, and it's just left on the table, right?
There's just nothing more than that. Yeah, it's just here's this
Especially
opportunity, and we're never going to explore it.
especially when she is seen to be kind of exploring all the opportunities that life presents too, right?
Yeah.
I need to know how that dynamic exists. If he's really gone that long without exploring anything, how is that a part of the dynamic? And like I said, it's a movie on its own that's apart from her and her relationship with Charlie. And if he is, as he should be, then that's the opportunity, because he could have other healthy relationships in his life as a part of, like maybe there is a woman that he's with while she's with Charlie, but he is still a good friend to her, you know, and none of
And
that
he's
is
still trying to
explained
start a
or,
life with that woman. Like, that would be the other part, too, right? Like, he's not
well,
slowing
sure.
down. Yeah.
We get that a little bit with Felix,
Hmm.
but in a certain sense, almost it would have been better, instead of having the story go to this random guy in Europe named Felix, have it go to Jason,
Yeah.
like, or after Charlie's death. I mean, build up the reasons why we care about her relationship with Jason in the first place, and then have her go to him after Charlie, not necessarily to sleep with him, right? But to develop that friendship, and maybe Jason has a child. Maybe Noelle is Jason's child. And then we can start to invest in that relationship and that dynamic in the wake of Charlie's death. And okay, Jason was really, really weirdly close to Charlie.
Yeah.
Besides that, though, because he was, then they can grieve together. And then we can we can expand upon the nature of life, the universe, and everything between them and their shared grief. But I mean, we barely see Jason. Never mind in the first act. In the second and the third act, the most we see of Jason in the second act of the film is the scene in the restaurant.
Yeah. And then we
And
don't see him again.
and if he's the central character in place of Felix, he can still be. Like, you put Jason where Felix is sitting in that restaurant, the scene can still happen.
Yeah.
Right? And then when we get to the third act, it has a whole lot more impact, because then you're dealing with should she, shouldn't she, right?
Oh, yeah. Like, yeah, now the feelings have stirred up. And should she be with this man that are her feelings with him legit, or is it basically his presence is occupying the absence of Charlie, and she's putting those feelings onto him, imprinting those feelings onto him just to help mend her own wounds? Or is there something real that's there? That's a good thing to explore.
Yeah, and I know we're getting into like spoiler territory.
Well, I mean, in this case here, like, there's no stakes in this script,
Yeah.
so there's nothing really to spoil. Which, I mean, that's one of the things I have troubles with this story, is that because there's no stakes, well, what's the risk here?
Well, I mean, yeah, the scene is what we've described about her, in the restaurant when Jason shows up. And again, I would take Felix out of the movie and make the character of Felix be Jason, and explore that relationship instead of getting all distracted. Because obviously, I guess what we're getting at, right, is that, as I've said, Jason loves Maya, and they have a really good relationship. It's been a great friendship. They've been like family to each other. And in the scene in the restaurant, she's crapping on the fact that, like, we're not family, like she says some pretty mean things, right?
Yeah.
Just like really crushing things. And there is something interesting there, because the idea is that Jason is somebody that, you know, she could actually have a long, happy life with. Even though Charlie was the perfect man, you know, this Jason character, he has been a great friend to her for a very long time, and he is also a great man. And there's a lot of story that can be told with how she grapples with that, as well as how they grapple with the grief together, because they were both, you know, close with Charlie. But again, the problem is that we barely see Jason for the entire the second and third act of the movie. We barely see him. We see him a little bit at the end, right? Because, you know, that is kind of the ultimate decision, is whether, you know, whether she can find love a second time. And I understand Felix is a character that's brought into the script to illustrate that maybe love does strike twice. It's even hammered over our heads at one point. It's said in the script, can, you know, is it possible that life offers us love twice?
Right.
Well, I don't need Felix to be the illustration of that, because Jason is meant to be the illustration of that. That is meant to be the decision she will ultimately make, is whether she will never find love again, or whether she'll take the obvious, wonderful thing that's right in front of her, right? And maybe have a child with him. Which, again, if Noelle was his kid, then that's another opportunity too, right? Because she's now in her early 40s. But maybe the child already exists, right?
Maybe.
That...
But as I was saying to you earlier before the show, like, because I read some passages of this script to my girlfriend, and she kind of thought it was a little absurd, and it came to my mind is like, this script is kind of like a test for beta males, because the way that it is displayed is that you have this Jason who, I guess, didn't do it for Maya when they were in college, but they became friends afterwards, and they maintained that friendship. She goes on to fall in love, get married, lose her husband, and then gallivants across Europe, only for her to come back, reconnect with Jason, and realize that, I guess, he was the love of her life. And to me, it feels that Jason, on the romantic side of things, stopped after that relationship ended, and then he just decided to, you know, first he's an alcoholic, so then he eventually gets into recovery. We find out that the evening of the funeral for Charlie, he got so drunk that he drove home, got into an accident, and that's how he got the scar on his face, and that's what, you know, led him onto the path of sobriety. And he hasn't done anything romantically with his life in that near decade of time. So literally, he is just a silver medal, or, you know, a life jacket of sorts romantically for Maya. Like, he is there to service her, and it's sad, and it's really not. It's not a good theme to explore, or at least even a good morality message to explore, which is, you know, convey to women who are watching this story is like, yep, after you lose the love of your life and you grieve, you know, go explore yourself and men in several foreign countries for a while, because you probably don't know it yet, but you probably have that guy in your life who's head over heels in love with you, and you just need to, like, exercise your demons and get some oats sowed before you realize he's the guy you got to be with, and he will always be there waiting for you. And I'm thinking that's a horrible thing to put out to the world, and put out to the world in a way to encourage it, as opposed to saying, like, no, you really should either not even entertain the idea that there's always going to be somebody in your friends group that's going to be waiting for you, because that's not going to be the case. And the second part is that you should show us consequences to the actions of that type of lifestyle, so that we can understand that it's not something you want to emulate or push forward. But this writer, Julia Cox, has said, no, this was part of the grieving process. I don't know if it's based off of her life or not, or if it's a fantasy of sorts, but it just feels like, yeah, she is very fortunate that she can work remotely, and passively to a point, and then drink and eat and meet exotic men, and spend nights or weeks with them, and then move on to another, and just go from there. And where's the point of the fact that it's an unfulfilling life in that
That's
area?
why. That's why I just feel like this is 20 different movies
Hmm.
smashed into a single script. There are some good ideas. Running around Europe and self-destructing and everything you just described. There's a movie in that particular story that could be a good one, but it's just so separated. It's like as much as I applaud the script for focusing very much on Maya and Charlie throughout the first act. There's some
Hmm.
other characters, but it doesn't get too confused with too many characters, right?
Oh yeah, it's
It
not
does,
bogged down with a ton of characters.
yeah. But at the same time, when we're talking about the second act and to a certain degree the third act, we got all these different ideas, like the relationship with Ruth, and that comes back in the third act.
Hmm.
How Maya has to reconcile the event with Ruth and their relationship. There's a little bit of a touching scene there. It's like whether how Maya wants to be loved, or Ruth, how Ruth is unsure about how Maya felt about her, and that kind of dynamic. And there's a cool relationship there, but what's the impact on it? Because we barely know anything about Ruth, and it's the same thing about Jason. You know, take all this gallivanting in Europe out, right? I mean, if the movie is really coming down to her relationship with Charlie and her relationship with Jason, then take all this noise out of the script and develop Jason better as a character. So as you say, he's not just some guy who stopped looking for women for a quarter century and got drunk all the time, you know?
Yeah, which
And,
is also great prospect for a relationship, right?
yeah, right. Yeah, show us why we care about him and in the process of his life and his dynamic, so that we can better appreciate the grieving process over Charlie and how that enhances her dynamic. The relationship between her and Jason. In the wake of Charlie's death, for a start, but also to better appreciate Jason and why he's not a silver medal, why he's a worthy person with his own flaws, and the dynamic she has, with him, and how that leads to the ultimate decision, and why we should care about that ultimate decision, right?
Yeah, because I'm getting memories of I don't know if you've seen it, but have you seen the Julia Roberts film My Best Friend's Wedding? With
It's another one I skipped.
Well, at some point at the end, like she accepts the fact that her best friend is marrying Cameron Diaz, and she has a gay best friend who decides, you know what, I'm just gonna be in a relationship with Julia Roberts' character, and she accepts it, and it's like it just doesn't feel authentic to have
Yeah.
or to have a character that is literally framed and introduced as the backup. It just
And
feels off.
I think that's the problem here. I mean, there is a potential for a great payoff, but I mean, at the end, she calls Jason up and she makes a decision. But that's literally it, right? Like calls him up and makes a decision. Much like her last interaction with Charlie was over the phone.
Yeah.
Maybe there's kind of a true to life sense about how a person will literally just make that compulsive decision, pick up the phone and make an important decision. Okay, that's fine. But this is a movie.
Mm-hmm.
I want some of the fantasy and the kind of excitement and drama of a movie. And never mind the fact, even just the fact, it's like the idea of how that's done. There's no impact to it, because it's like, oh, I'm going to make this ultimate decision now about the rest of my life. Shouldn't I, with this man?
Mm-hmm.
And we just spent the last hour of the movie during which he had a minute of screen time total.
Maybe
Out of the whole last, maybe a minute of screen time in the whole last hour of the movie. And in the first act of the movie, he probably had maybe 5 minutes, if that. We're talking about a character that had 5 to 10 minutes of screen time in a 2-hour movie. And he's the ultimate decision of the movie. Will she or will she not spend the rest of her life with this man who had maybe 5 to 10 minutes of screen time generously throughout a 2-hour movie? It's like,
yeah. It's like, well, I don't feel great that these two finally got together because I barely knew who the other one was.
Well, that's it. It's it's like he appears in the first act. We were just told that he's best friends with Charlie. In the second act, he appears in that restaurant scene.
Mm-hmm.
Good scene. Again. I would put him in the place of I would put Jason in the place of Felix. But good scene. But it's all we see of him in the entire second act. And
Yeah.
in the third act, we get a couple of short conversations between Maya and Jason.
Oh, and on top of that, Jason has beefed up and gotten more distinguished with age to the point where now she finds him
He looks
attractive.
good.
So there's
You're
that.
right.
Like, that does not make Maya look good.
Awful. That was so awful. I mean, like, I appreciate that he's changed and he's grown and he's become a better person, but there's no context for that. We just know that he was a drunk before, and now he's got his life together. Okay, that's fine, but there's no actual passage to that character development. He just shows up one day and it's like, oh, I'm not drunk anymore. And she notices that he's not a drunk anymore. And they have like a 60-second conversation. And then a few pages later, she makes this life-altering, like movie-defining decision. And it's like...
And then again, we get another skip of a montage. And what do we have? Well, we have, and this is the spoilers part, but it doesn't really count because, again, Maya and Jason end up getting together, and then they go back to Ruth's place, and we find out that since Maya has returned stateside, they annually go to Ruth's place to celebrate Charlie's life while she's there with her new husband, Jason, and their adopted daughter. And it's supposed to be this very, like, joyous moment, but it feels just kind of creepy.
A little bit. It's just incomplete.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we skipped. I guess we've skipped ahead a few more years, and she got the daughter that I guess she wanted, but there was never any context to whether
no desire of it.
Completely unexplored throughout the entire movie. There's a good concept there about the struggle of wanting or not wanting a child, but it's barely mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And it's supposed to be the big. She finally got the child that she always wanted. Did she always want the child?
No, such an afterthought.
We never explored it.
Yeah, it's such an afterthought. It's like, okay, so that's some new information that has come, I guess, around the time when she meets Noelle, but then isn't really brought up much again afterwards about her desire for a kid. And it's an adoption, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But it also makes me wonder, like, well, is she going to Jason because she knows him, there's familiarity, and she knows that maybe he could help her get a kid? Or, like, there's something beyond, like, it feels like there's something malicious underneath Maya's actions that got her to this result. Because, I mean, I know a little bit about the adoption system. I do know that a single parent, especially of age, wanting to adopt, unless you have a ton of money, it's not going to happen because most adoption agencies prefer a two-parent household. And I'm wondering subconsciously, is the writer doing this because she thinks it's romantic, or is there something in there where through Maya she's like, if I want to have that kid, if I want to be a mom, I need someone who I can rely on to facilitate that, and Jason is that beta male that, sure, yeah, I'll marry you. That type of thing.
It's I mean, it's not the feeling I would prefer from a romantic movie.
Yeah. It's not. These are not questions I want entering my mind when I'm watching a story that's supposed to be about love and the love of your life, and what that means. And then the other part too, which I was kind of hoping for once we got into the story of Charlie and Maya together, is that, well, Charlie's not the love of the life, that the child that they would create would then become the love of her life, right? Because that just goes into another story, which is Arrival, which is, a science fiction story, but it's really about the fact that she knows that she has a daughter that is going to die of an illness, and because she knows she can go back and forward through time and change it, would she change anything, or would she leave it as it is? And she chooses to leave it as it is. So it's very So it
That's why
raises all sorts of weird questions when I'm reading this story.
that's why I say that there's a whole bunch of movie ideas in this script. I don't know if the script itself is the movie, but there's 20 different movies you could write from ideas in the script, or you could potentially adapt it into like a multi-season television show with a good, skilled writer who could tell the story of, this time through her life, and better expand upon the characters.
Yeah. So with that being said, CC, would you give this script a green light or a pass?
That's a hard pass for me. On previous times that I've been a guest on your show, I've said, I'll pass, but I think that the script could be patched up and rewritten. On this occasion, I'm not even going to go that far. I don't think that this script can simply be fixed.
I agree. I think this is also a pass for myself. It's got a lot of issues to it. I think it's too many ideas mixed into trying to be one story. I think there's a lot your general audience can infer that would be negative towards this script, that if it were shot as it was, I think a director and a cast would have a lot of heavy lifting to do to kind of hide the flaws that we've pointed out here. So yeah, this would be a pass for myself. And checking in with the patrons over there, they got to vote on whether they greenlight or pass this, and it's a blind vote, so I don't know who voted for what, but it's a 50-50 split over there between the audience. So some people liked aspects of the script enough to give it a green light, and others, I guess, shared some of our perspectives. A reminder again, as I said at the start of the show, this came in number 4 on last year's Blacklist with 37 votes. So a lot of producers saw something in this script that we I guess didn't pick up on, or maybe they did pick up on it and were pro that because they live in California, and that's a weird state with a lot of weird relationship dynamics out there. So yeah, it's a very perplexing script for me, and for you as well, CC, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't think a simple polish job is going to be enough here. I mean, if you had it, like I say, if you have a skilled writer and you want to turn it into like a 10, 12 episode series, or a 20 or 30 episodes, or
or some sort of mini-series thing, yeah.
Or you pluck an idea out of it and turn that idea into a movie. But I mean, I would almost, okay, the script was sold. So, I mean, if they're planning on filming this anywhere close to its current state, I don't even know. I'm not going to go so far as to say that it's devoid of good ideas. There are good ideas here, right? Mm-hmm. But it's so far from what I would consider to be a complete product that you're going to put to film as it is, that I don't even know what they're going to do with it.
No, I don't know much either at this point, but I will say this was a far better conversation that we had about the script than I was expecting, because again, it was, even though it's 120 pages and it feels like it's a lot longer, there is actually not a whole lot of substance to this script.
No, I was worried about that going in too, but there are some good philosophical ideas, and maybe that's, we were hopefully able to tap into that.
Yeah, there are some parts there. I think its biggest shortcoming is the fact that it presents the idea, but it doesn't present a stake or some sort of obstacle to challenge that idea. There's no steel manning arguments with any perspectives here. It feels more like a voyeuristic film where we're just watching this woman go through various points of life, but there's no real goal or motivational drive behind her. And I think that's what hurts this the most. I mean, if the goal was the fact that she fell in love with the guy, she got married, she's all ready to have kids, and then their first obstacle is, oh, we have a pandemic. Well, we can't get pregnant now. It's too crazy out there. I mean, and we don't know what's going on and what have you. And then that choice ends up resulting in the fact that now she's a widow, and now she's back to square one, where she's like, am I still young enough to find love and have that kid, or do I have to explore other options? Like, that would be that would at least allow us to empathize and relate to her, right? But there's nothing of that even entertained at all. It's more like she fell in love, she lost her husband, she decided to sow her wild oats in her 30s up until her early 40s, and then falls back on the best friend who is fortunate enough to have never moved on in his life after her. And now they have this relationship that I don't think, honestly, is one really about love. I think it's more out of convenience.
Yeah. I mean, it's a series of ideas, right? Where the writer, it's like, I have this idea, I want to present the idea.
Yeah.
Okay. That's fine. But what next? Right? I mean, we talk about that a lot in modern writing, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I have a message I want to convey. And look, this script is not, it's not really political or anything. But
No,
there is there's definitely a very, very similar aspect wherein it's like the writer has an idea they want to convey. And the intent is literally to tell the audience, this is my idea. But you have to go further than that. You have to again.
You have to give us the reason of why that idea is valuable.
Yeah.
And
it doesn't really happen here.
No. Unfortunately, it doesn't. It just they're ideas that are just ideas, and the way we connect with stories is that we understand the value of those ideas, why they're there. You don't necessarily have to agree or disagree with them, but if the argument is consistent and it follows in the narrative and it follows in some drama, then you better your odds of entertaining and engaging your audience that way. And this one here, this story, because it has a lack of stakes, because it doesn't seem to have a very solid idea as to what this story is about and why it needs to exist, feels like it's very lacking for me.
I mean, my favorite idea that you brought forth in this whole show, honestly, is the jaywalking thing, because I mean, what the problem that I'm getting here is, okay, the writer wants to communicate, maybe, let's say one character doesn't like the idea of jaywalking, and the other character is like, yeah, let's jaywalk. Okay, there's a potential for conflict there, but how does that interact with who they are as characters? What's the state of the traffic? Are they in danger? What is causing them to have to jaywalk? What's the interaction? Is there an obstacle they encounter halfway across the road? Is a cab driver yelling at them? These kinds of little details that really kind of dig into the scene don't exist. In this case, the writer's like, well, he wants to jaywalk and he's going to pull her across the street, and that takes 30 seconds and nothing happens, and it has been communicated that he pulled her across the street, and she was cool with it because they're in such a healthy relationship.
Yeah, the other part too is it also shows which character is the one that takes charge, that has a little bit of risk, but also confidence to know that with such a risk, there's some safety there, right? Because there's something inherently attractive about that type of behavior, where it's like, oh, okay, so like in my situation, the reason I had that suggestion is because I had such a great time with my girlfriend on that date that we ended up spending longer at the restaurant and we got late for the show. So it's like, well, she really wants to see this show, so I'm gonna have to make up the time. And so one way to do that is like, do we wait for the light at this intersection that the light takes forever, or since the traffic is light, do I just grab her by the wrist and be like, okay, stay close to me because we're doing this? And she was like, wait, what? And then I did it. And one of the things that was kind of miraculous is that we're halfway across the street, and it only takes like 20 seconds to cross the street, but she just starts laughing, and then we're shoulder to shoulder. We make it to the end, and then we get inside the theater, and everything's all good, and we get our seats, and we're fine. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's that's your magical moment there. That's where, one of the two parties showed a little initiative, and therefore you have the conflict of like, oh, well, I don't want to take this type of risk, or I don't want to, get hit by a car, or maybe we can be late. I can live with that, what have you. And you have the one person who's saying, well, no, I'm doing this because I'm motivated by the fact that we're having such a good time. That good time might be impacting another good time that's just around the corner. This little risk can keep the flow of those good times going forward, and it'd be foolish not to take that risk. And I don't advise jaywalking into traffic, of course, but I made an educated guess at the time, and it paid off.
No, that's good. And so I'm just saying, this script, first of all, it doesn't include the theater for any context.
No.
Right? The scene only includes the jaywalking without any context around the theater. Maybe it gives us the laugh halfway across, but there's no other stakes involved, right?
Right.
There's nothing to. There's no trap. There's no other cars on the road whatsoever. It's a completely empty road, and you're not actually going to the theater. There's no reason for the rush.
Right. That would be how this writer would take such an idea. The conflict would just be completely evaporated, and it's like, we're just going to do this. And where's the fun in that? And that's one of the things I was worried about, because even when we have that scene where she gets really drunk and she meets that guy, she starts throwing up, you're like, oh, is this going to cost her a night with that guy? And the guy's like, no, I'm fine with it. I'll still kiss you after the vomit. It's like, come on.
Cute,
like, never make anything easy for your main characters. And for her, a lot of stuff was very easy. She didn't have to work to get Jason to fall in love with her. He was already in love with her. And and we never got a sense of like, Cicero, where he was pining for her, but help coaching Charles to be the man of her dreams, and then he dies and he doesn't come in. I mean, I'm just as I'm saying this, I'm like, that could actually be a really good story.
Well, it's probably why we got 2 hours out of this conversation, is because there actually is a lot to talk about from writing structure and like lessons in how to write involved with dissecting something that is maybe a bit flawed. So.
Yeah, but it's been a great conversation. I didn't think we'd get nearly 2 hours out of it, but I'm happy we did. Definitely interesting aspects of the script. I definitely want to congratulate Julia Cox, not just for placing so high on the blacklist, but also being able to sell the script. That's no easy task and feat, and I do hope that whatever happens as the script develops, I hope the final product is far better than what we read. Overall, because
despite the criticism, I mean, congratulations.
Absolutely, yeah. Like, I'm not envious or jealous of this. I'm just thinking like, okay, this is a weird script, but hey, enough and the right people and enough people dug it, so it's going forward. So let's see how it plays out. I wonder who they'll get involved. I wonder how it will change, if at all, and also I wonder how the general audience will receive it. So it's and the other part too, as we mentioned earlier, it's not politically charged at all. The topics that it could have gotten political, it definitely avoids, and I think that's a good sign to let those listening know. So yeah,
and good casting go a long way. Heck, I mean, you have a skilled director who can add those little elements.
Mm-hmm.
Like focusing in on the dresser, and you have a really charming cast that can sell themselves, do some heavy lifting. Still, the script still needs some polish, though.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, with that said, thanks so much, CC, for joining me this weekend. Where can our wonderful listeners and subscribers over here find you and what you do on the interwebs?
Well, my channel is CC Karaoke, and if you like singing karaoke, then you can always look me up. I have lots of karaoke videos on YouTube.
Yes, you do. Well, again, thank you so much for joining me this evening. For those of you out there listening, please leave that like and share. If you want to know what type of scripts we are going to be reviewing on the following week, please consider joining the Patreon, because there we announce the scripts that we're reviewing and give you as patrons a chance to vote on whether you'd greenlight or pass on the script. And if you leave a comment as to why you voted the way you did, we'll read it here on the show, just as we covered the poll results for this week's script at a 50-50 split. You too can participate that way as well. With that being said, I want to thank you all for joining us this weekend, and have a wonderful weekend. And until next time, remember, guys, when it comes to great story, it all starts with the script.